What's up, Weirdo Swarm, and welcome back to another episode of Podagon Infinity, the podcast that opens the door to all things King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. My name is Joe.
And my name is Spenser. Joe, this here podcast ain't big enough for the two of us.
What in tarnation?
Any guesses on what our episode's about today, listener?
Yeah, you might be able to guess, and you would already know if you listened to our last episode where we teased it at the end. But today we are taking a step back in time, all the way back to 2013's Eyes Like the Sky.
At first I thought you were going to say back in time to the 1850s, 1860s, which would have been appropriate for the subject matter of the album. But yeah, this is going way back in time.
That is also true. We're going back to the 1850s, 60s, but also 2013.
That's right, yeah, which, of course, in Giz years is a long, long time ago.
Yep.
So the point still stands. Very old album, kind of a forgotten one in the discography, I think, but one that's going to be intriguing to talk about, not only because it's sort of a forgotten, dusty gem for most of the fan base, but also it's a much different format and a much different, differently composed type of album than is most of the rest of the discography.
Yeah, this one is over 12 years old now, which, in general timelines of a band's music doesn't sound that old, but like you said, in Giz years, that's a long time. And this one is really weird, and a weird, dusty old one, as you said, because this one's almost like an audiobook in a way, but with this incredible badass soundtrack of this bizarre lo-fi western rock music that goes along to a story written and narrated by Broderick Smith, who is, of course, the father of Ambrose.
Yeah, and you brought up your desire to talk about this album some time ago, and then we were finally able to slot it into our sort of production schedule or our recording timeline. I am legitimately curious to know some of your thoughts and your theories or your reactions to some of the songs and some of the content on this album. But before we go any further, Joe, we should give our listeners a quick reminder. If you are not already following us on social media, please do so if you feel so inclined. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also email us at podagoninfinity@gmail.com. We regularly read listener messages, whether it's commentary on one of the relevant album topics we're talking about, or any sort of Giz stories or fun facts, or even some maybe fact corrections or fact checking. That's always helpful. We welcome that when the opportunity comes. We welcome anything, so please do write into us when inspiration strikes you. And yeah. Okay, now for some quick basic background on Eyes Like the Sky, which the band released on February 22nd, 2013. It was studio album number 2, which is, in the case that you count 12 Bar Bruise as the debut, not Willoughby's Beach, which was the shorter length EP. There are a couple differing schools of thought on what should be considered the debut, but, if we're going by 12 Bar Bruise as the debut studio album for the band, this is number 2. There are some fun little album liner notes written by Stu, and I would like to quote those right now as he gives some background. Quote, "Sometime in July 2012, we played a show in Castlemaine with Broderick Smith. He's a crazy genius Western next rocker and is also Ambrose's father. This was not long after we had collaborated with him in the recording of Sam Cherry's Last Shot, so we performed an off-the-cuff version of that song to a half-dozen confused locals. That got me thinking about trying a multi-song, read-along, narrative-based Western musical record. Brod seemed keen to compose a story and provide narration, so Cavs, Lucas, and I raced to my parents' garage and recorded Fort Whipple and The Killing Ground. You can hear my parents' dogs barking in the background and my dad banging on some old rusted saw blade. I didn't really have much of an idea about recording back then. Still don't, really. I think I had 2 microphones and was recording onto this hunk of shit but kinda awesome digital 8-track machine. We had no mic stands, so one mic was taped onto a shoebox in front of a guitar amp, and one was hanging over the drum kit, boxing ring style, from the roof truss. I sent these recordings to Brod, and he wrote the first chapter of Eyes Like the Sky that night, and sent me a recording of him reading it into his computer mic. It sounded kind of fucked up, so played it through a guitar amp, recorded it, and synced it to the next recording we made, which ended up being the title track. Brod and I went back and forward from there, sometimes the music inspiring the words or the words inspiring the music. It all came together pretty fast, so as you may be able to tell, it is flattering and bemusing to me that people would want to listen to this fried, weird, lo-fi record of ours. So thank you very much. Enjoy. Love, Stu. He was so proud of this from the very beginning. And how about that home-cooked feel to just the production in the background of this record?
Yeah, I love hearing stories of this, especially, I mean, they still do weird stuff sometimes, but these early days of the band where they're in a garage with nothing but 2 microphones, a couple guitar amps, Broad's doing all the narration just into, like, presumably like a little USB microphone or something on his computer, like really basic, no professional studio, anything like that. And it still sounds as good as it does, you know, like obviously it is lo-fi, it's gritty, but it sounds good. It doesn't sound like complete, you know, amateur dog shit or anything. It sounds good, and it sounds very fitting for exactly what they were going for here. So yeah, they made it work, man. It's great.
So most Gizheads listening in are more or less familiar with the gist of how this album began, and of course we just gave you a lot of the background detail there as written by Stu, but just to break it down, especially for some of the newer listeners or newer Gizheads who are listening to this podcast, band member Ambrose Kenny Smith's dad, Broderick Smith, wrote and narrated this story that you will hear on this album. Broderick sadly passed away in April of 2023, and the band, as we'll get into a little bit later, actually performed several of these tracks at a show in Los Angeles around the time to honor his memory, which was really a nice, sweet gesture. But Broderick was a highly successful musician in his own right. In the 1970s and 80s, he performed primarily in 4 different bands at various times. I was able to garner these actually from Broderick Smith's Wikipedia page. The Adderley Smith Blues Band, Carson, the Dingoes, does it get any more Australian than that? And Broderick Smith's Big Combo. Largely a bluesman, and he actually lists some of his major influences as Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, and Charlie Musselwhite. Doesn't get any more bluesy than that. Those are all American bluesmen who are real pioneers in the field. And the apple didn't fall far from the tree, as we know as Gizheads. Ambrose has a similar musical sweet spot. He's really got the bluesman's blood in him. He's got that soulful voice and can belt it out just like his dad surely could in his day and age. But Broderick really brings a cool kind of grit and deep voice and a cool narration to this whole album. I actually, Joe, the first time I listened to this, I don't know about you, I thought this was just some random American guy that they had chosen, like maybe he was a friend or a family friend or something.
Yeah.
But no, Ambrose's dad, who was born in England but Australian native, like totally put on an American accent, and it could have fooled anybody. Like, he sounds like an American man.
Oh yeah, I had no idea about this before the first time I heard it. I just listened to it one day as I was first getting into the band and getting into some of their earlier stuff. And yeah, like, I don't know who this American dude is. And then later I find out it's one of the band members' dads, who's a, you know, Australian just like the rest of them. And yeah, not only is his American accent spot on, perfect, but it also has a little bit of this old timiness kind of in his voice that sounds like, I don't know if it's necessarily like a particular Western accent or anything like that, but it's like, it's got this something about the way he speaks, the flow of his voice has kind of an old American man kind of voice. So he hits the nail right on the head. It's impressive.
It does kind of sound like you're listening to some like 1940s or 50s radio program, doesn't it? I think that's what you're getting at, kind of.
Yeah, totally.
So once we get into the track by track momentarily here, we will of course get into the specifics of the storyline, but we will meet our protagonist, who ends up going by many names, the biggest of which is Eyes Like the Sky, the album's namesake. And I just want to tip my cap to the absolute balls these guys had to release this as their second studio LP. And you think of any other artist on earth who is facing kind of your typical second album syndrome, they call it, where it's just like, okay, do we stick with the success of that first album if the debut was successful and risk people criticizing, oh, they just went back to the well with the same old shit, or do we try and change things up a little bit and risk criticism of, oh, why didn't you stick with your sweet spot? Why didn't you stick with the one that brung you, you know? And these guys just said, fuck it, to hell with it. We're going to do what we want, and it's going to be D, none of the above, you know?
Yeah. It still has that gritty guitar tone and that lo-fi production that, you know, people at this point would have known and come to expect from their first 2 releases, but like, done in such a different, weird, unique way. Like, yeah, seriously, that they just did not give a shit. They thought they had fun with Sam Cherry's Last Shot on 12 Bar Brews, and they're like, what if we did that, but it's a whole album? Sure, yeah, let's just do it. Let's just do it because we feel like it and not care what anybody else thinks.
One final small little interesting tidbit. A few months ago, I happened upon a podcast called the Vinyl Guide Podcast, and they actually interviewed Ambrose. And there was all kinds of chatter around the band and stuff, and Ambrose was his usual sweet, really engaging self. And during that interview, it actually came out that there was originally supposed to be some sort of sequel to Eyes Like the Sky, but that ended up getting shelved. It got shelved, I believe, way before Ambrose's father ended up passing away, so it just kind of got buried among the band's other ideas. Whether or not that'll ever see the light of day, I'm not sure. I certainly have my doubts about it, but, Joe and the Gizverse, never say never, right?
Never say never. All right, with that, let's get right into our track by track. Let's get this thing started. This is the opening track and the title track. It is, of course, Eyes Like the Sky.
So from the very beginning of this album, there's an immediate, vivid picture in our minds that gets painted by the soundscape. You almost feel like you're right in the midst of this vast expanse of open desert with cacti and scrub brush, mountains and red rock formations in the distance. It really puts you in a place, and then after a little bit of Broderick Smith's narration, then comes the main riff of this opening track. These guitar triplets followed by the drum strikes. It's all in sync, it's all in lockstep, and it builds this tension that's so appropriate and so characteristic of that kind of old western, spaghetti western type of thing.
Yeah, it is the perfect theatrical opening to this story. We get this very simple yet epic and very fitting, very western sounding guitar riff, as you were describing, the main riff that comes in shortly into the song. It's so simple but so effective for getting you right into this and telling you everything you need to know about what is going on here. Also, at the very beginning, before that main riff comes in, we just get that simple quote from Broderick off the top. The bad white men call him the devil. The Yavapai call him Eyes Like the Sky. And then it just kicks right in. It's so awesome. So kick-ass way for this thing to start. This first track overall is a prologue, an introduction to the main character of the story for whom the song is named. It's written kind of just like a book in that way, or like a short story, where you have a sort of a prologue introducing some background kind of things, and then later in the next track is where we actually get chapter 1, where it goes kind of back to the beginning, to the origins of the story. But Broderick here in this opening track is describing the time and place where this story is happening in the lawless southwestern United States during a very tumultuous time in the country's history where people are fighting for land, among other things, and the Civil War is breaking out further east. Our main character is born out of this chaotic period and is feared far and wide for his killing skills, or, as Brod puts it, swift economical dispatching of his enemies.
That's such a artful way to put it. Like, yeah, he kills guys efficiently, but it is a really cool and effective prologue, as you stated. It's setting the scene of this mid 1800s sort of scene where things are very different in the western part of the United States than they are in the east. You mentioned the Civil War is going on further east as the Union and Confederate soldiers are battling it out over there. In the west, there's really just kind of a mishmash of various skirmishes between all the various Native American tribes, the Mexicans, which of course it's widely known also that at one time, and really in the grand scheme, not too far distant in the past, what is now the southwestern United States was largely part of Mexico still. And so a lot of these territories were there were disputes over these territories. There were all sorts of, disagreements and battles popping up between tribes and the Mexican people, Mexican soldiers. They figure into the story a little bit later on as well. But it's even though it's a very different kind of landscape and a different kind of storyline, this really is a nation at war during the time that this album is set to take place in.
There are some other audio elements on top of just the main simple guitar riff and drums. There's also some sound effects, like there's this loud popping sound that seems to be imitating gunfire. I wonder if that is what you mentioned in the Stu quote earlier of Stu's dad banging on a saw blade. I don't know if maybe that's what that one is. It's one of those. And then there's also these lighter taps as well that are sort of imitating like a horse galloping, like someone's tapping on something, sort of in that galloping kind of sound. So there's all these different elements, and it's just like the guys with a microphone and random objects that they're banging on and shit, as they did a lot in their early music to create a soundscape like this. But man, it is effective in helping to paint that picture right alongside all of Broderick's narration and setup of the story.
It's very resourceful, and this really helps paint the picture further of the band not really going on any big tours just yet at this point in their career. They're still kind of scraping by with some garage studio space setups, and we mentioned in the earlier part of this episode, the microphone taped to the shoebox, another microphone kind of draped over the trusses of the garage, kind of hanging down like the boxing ring announcer's microphone would be.
Yeah.
Just all this like basically paperclip and bubblegum equivalent kind of setup, but they're still building such an effective audio scenery. You talked about the sound effects of the gunfire and the little kind of popping or clip-clop sounds. We do hear the banging on the saw blade a little bit later in the album, actually. Through my research, at least, I was able to find out that there is a lot of spring reverb, kind of that spring reverb pedal effect on a couple of the guitars throughout the album. Not only in the notes they're playing, but in just some of these harsher sound effects too. They just let it kind of go and make all those crazy noises.
Yeah.
There is also, though, a similar type of noise achieved through the use of the vibroslap, an instrument that we've discussed a couple of times on the show before, used a little bit on the song Rattlesnake and also on Hot Wax, which, of course, neither of those the band had performed yet at this point in their careers, but like I said, we talked about on the show before, and it kind of gives it that rattlesnake, very Southwestern appropriate.
So if you listen to our last episode at the end when we announced that this was going to be the topic of this next episode, I mentioned that my inspiration for wanting to cover this album was my big fandom for and lots of time spent with the game Red Dead Redemption 2 earlier this year. I had played the original game years ago and finally played the sequel, which is actually a prequel, earlier this year. And of course, it takes place sort of at the end of the Old West era in America in the 1890s. Something about the soundtrack of that game kind of reminded me of this album in some ways, and so around the time while playing the game, I would go back and listen to this album some more and more, and it made me really want to cover it soon on the show, so here we are. But in particular, there is one song from that soundtrack that sounds quite similar to Eyes Like the Sky, to this opening track. There is a song on the soundtrack called Outlaws from the West, and I swear it uses the same two first notes in it. So the da-na-na of Eyes Like the Sky does those same two notes just in kind of a different rhythm, but it sounds very, very similar to them. The guitar tone and the production's a little different. It's not as lo-fi and crunchy and all that. I also shared this album with a good friend of mine who's also a big fan of the Red Dead Redemption games. Shout out to Cole. And he happened to browse the wiki page one day for this album and came across some interesting info that he sent me a screenshot of. In an interview, Stu talked about some of the influences for this album and said, quote, "I love Western films, I love bad guys, and I love Red Dead Redemption. Oh, and I love evil guitars," whatever that last part means. But let's just say I felt very validated after reading this. This was so awesome to read, and the particular song that I'm pointing out from the game's soundtrack is from Red Dead Redemption 2, which came out in 2018. So I don't know if that was somehow inspired by Eyes Like the Sky, if anyone working on the game is aware of them or not, or if it's just coincidence and they just kind of both follow that like Western cowboy kind of trope music that maybe they just ended up sounding very similar. But the first Red Dead Redemption game came out back in 2010, so that would have been out and been popular at the time that they were, in the early days of the band. So I guess Stu is a fan. Stu played that game and had some inspiration from that, and then just by some weird coincidence or whatever, there's a song on the sequel's soundtrack that sounds kind of like this song that was maybe inspired by the first game. It's a whole crazy thing I've got my head spinning around, but yeah, I was very satisfied in reading this information and knowing that Stu played the game.
Yeah, it's a real chicken or the egg kind of situation, like who truly came up with the first idea of that riff, but in truth, this type of riff and this whole type of musical motif goes so far back. And one of the first names that came to mind was Ennio Morricone, who wrote the famous soundtrack for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which came out in 1966. And that's that wah, wah, wah. That's like one of those iconic little pieces of musical score that that most people have heard, even if they've never seen that movie before. But it's kind of in that same vein of musical influence. There's that very Old West kind of characteristic, kind of Phrygian scale-inspired riffs and motifs that evoke that Old West imagery, and it's very Spanish influence, which, of course, just by association, appropriate for the present-day southwestern United States. It all just kind of plays off one another, and there's also the surf rock motif that plays in as well. It all just kind of interplays and intermixes, even some feeling of honky-tonk kind of twangy country in the guitar here and there on the album. But we just get soaked with it, just drenched with it here on the opening track. This is what we're going to be getting as far as the overall musical feel for the rest of the album. Just a couple of words and terms that did catch my eye before we move on the track listing here. Gatling gun, which was a word that I'd heard before. I might have heard it in passing in my history classes growing up. I looked it up. It's a primitive early version of a machine gun, which was hand-cranked, and it was adopted by the U.S. Army in the 1860s. So that's part of this whole song and the narrative, like kind of explaining the passage of time. Weapons are improving. All this technology is expanding and advancing. And it's really a cool way to kind of portray the passage of time and how quickly things are ramping up on this old Western frontier. Also, the words wickiups and longhouses are mentioned in Broad's narration. Wickiups are like these oval-shaped homes or dwellings made of grass or sticks. It was once common among the nomadic people of the American West. And also longhouses are much more permanent structures. They were usually made of wood, more long and narrow, and used as communal spaces. So that's just getting down to the nitty-gritty on the definition of a couple of words that threw me for a loop. I didn't get them at first, and hopefully that'll be some new knowledge to you listeners. Wow, so we've talked a lot about this opening track already. Joe, you ready to move on now?
All right, let's go.
Track number 2, Year of Our Lord.
Year of Our Lord has such a nice groovy riff right off the top, starting out with that bass and then the drums kicking in and the guitar joining the bass in that riff. This one feels like much more of a complete song than the previous track. The last one is just so much simpler and just the simple introduction and the simple guitar riff. But this one really feels like more of a complete song. You still got more of those, of course, very gritty, distorted guitars. There's some fluttering harmonica from Ambrose that's so simple yet so fitting. Just that coming in and out that I love, that just feels like the sound of a tumbleweed rolling by across the desert or something.
Yeah, I had in my notes here, juicy bass is the way this one starts off. And then those surf vibes kind of return with that groovy kind of guitar part that you mentioned. Continues to build the landscape, and like you said, this song is much more of a complete song structure than was the opening track, because that one was more exposition, scene setting. This one is, we should mention first, this is actual chapter 1 as part of Broderick's narration there, where he literally says the words Chapter 1, before continuing. They'd been watching the farmhouse for a while, maybe all day. There were two of them, both young and fit and desert-hardened. And as a listener, I think the first time I was going, wait, who's they?
Yeah.
We have to kind of pay some attention to the context and also get some, as per usual, some help from our friends at kglw.net. Shout out to that hardworking crew on that site. This track follows the Yavapai Apache people who are plotting a raid on a farmhouse where white settlers live. And we should note the Yavapai Apache are real people. That is a real-life tribe based in the state of Arizona, where the majority of this story takes place. And so they're basically plotting this raid on a farmhouse, and this is kind of reflective of a way of life for the native people living in the western United States. Raids were common. Basically, these people would look to build their armies and would oftentimes raid, sometimes for supplies, but I think more commonly, as is the case here on the album, more commonly trying to build their tribe and build their army. So in many cases, they would come and take children from their home and raise them to be soldiers among their people.
Yeah.
So in the case of Miguel O'Brien here, which is the young boy that we first meet here on track 2, they take him from his home at the age of 5. They're basically going to turn him into this tough warrior who's really going to help defend his people, defend the land, and it's just such a hard scrabble way of life. But it's a really, like, I think, artfully understated approach in the narration that Broderick Smith is taking here, and not getting too bogged down in details and the second by second of everything. Like, he's being a little bit intentionally vague. It's like, okay, listener, you have to be engaged and you need to kind of keep pace with me in order to follow the story.
Yeah, I definitely had trouble following along the first few times I listened to this album. I really needed to kind of go back to it a few times and also read along with the story to fully get everything and pause it and think about stuff for a minute here and there. So there's a lot of moments where you have stuff like that where things are seemingly, intentionally vague perhaps. Just to get into a little more of the details of what's being described here, these two Yavapai Apache men are watching over this white family's homestead, and they plan to raid it with other men of their group who are nearby, as Spenser was saying, take some supplies, and more specifically, potentially take child captives that they can raise as their own as part of their army, and then grow their tribe. So these two take note of how many people there are, one older man with two smaller ones believed to be his sons, and then there's a woman that would occasionally walk out to get water with a smaller child alongside of her. During this section where the narration is describing the people there and all this, the music takes a very dark and anxious sounding turn, which just perfectly builds suspense toward the quote raid that is very soon to take place.
Yeah, I think the part you're referring to is around the middle part of the song. Am I correct in that, Joe?
Yeah, right when he starts with the smoke from the mud house curled up into the sky like an albino snake, and there's that, and they describe how many people they see, and they're just kind of taking note of everything and getting the layout before swarming in and attacking.
Smoke from the mud house curled up into the sky like an albino snake. The two young men watched and counted the white men down in the farmyard. Tall man and two shorter ones, maybe his sons.
Right, so they're kind of casing the joint, really kind of effectively building a plan as to how they're going to go in and take this young boy with them. But I like how you point out the tension that emerges right through that midpoint of the song. They're plotting, they're scheming, they're figuring out how they're going to get in, how they're going to get out. It almost sounds like an organ, like this creepy organ, but in truth, I don't know actually what that instrument is. And with this being one of the oldest albums in the discography, we actually don't have the benefit compared to some of the more recent albums of, getting the track-by-track breakdown on who plays what instrument on what track. That wouldn't start for another 2-3 years or so for the band. So we really are doing a little bit of guesswork as far as the instrumentation, but whatever that actually is, it kind of makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up a little, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. It's probably an organ or just keys of some sort, but it's also so lo-fi and all that.
Right as the music drops out here on track 2, the narration from Broad kind of continues unencumbered and really without any musical backing. As he says, one of the watchers moved away to tell the main party of what they had seen. The raid was about to start. And that raid will be described on track number 3, right, Joe?
Yep, this is track number 3. Wouldn't you know, it's called The Raid.
Another dramatic electric guitar riff introduces the raid. As you imagine looking across the desolate desert landscape again, and then the percussion comes in, almost emulating the galloping of horses. And then the guitar kind of follows suit. You could just hear the chase and the sprinting and the tension as things unfold.
Yeah,
they're trying to get in, get out, get what they need or get who they need in this case. But the evoking of horses galloping here just helps illustrate the urgency of this song in this part of the story.
Yeah, the raid is a very fast-paced jam with some real intensity that once again is just a perfect soundtrack to this part of the story, which we will get into in just a moment. But yeah, that super high-pitched, like turbo fast guitar strumming. It's and the drums chugging along, like you were saying, kind of almost like mimicking a horse galloping. Yeah, it's all fast-paced. It's like just a storm of it. It literally sounds like what it is. It sounds like a group just running and taking over a place and starting a fight and all of this. It's just pure chaos, but in like organized chaos that just makes sense for what's happening.
Yeah, and it's all with the backing of that very Dick Dale-esque guitar riff. There's kind of that really fast sweep picking, which I think was the same part that you were just referring to.
Yeah, it is almost kind of like surfy in a way, and I know you bring that up a lot, but there's little that I know a lot of their early music kind of had that like fast kind of punkish surf rock thing going on, and so there's definitely some elements of that mixed in with this old west twangy sound at the same time.
This is one of the tracks that's lightest on narration, if not the lightest on narration from Broad, and I can just go ahead and read the whole thing now without taking up too much time.
Yep.
They were not after the money, they were not after alcohol, they were after guns and young children to raise as their own. The war had made it necessary to take child captives. The rest would be slaughtered. That is how Miguel O'Brien became a Yavapai Apache warrior. He was 5 years old, and I like how he chose to end his narrative bit with by the way, he was 5 years old, and you're just like hit as the listener like, holy shit, like, because this stuff really did happen. It really did happen.
Yeah, and this actually starts sort of a pattern throughout a few tracks where the narration ends with him saying what age he currently is. So later we'll hear, he did this at 15, and then, now he's 16, now he's 17. There's multiple tracks that sort of end in this way of like, that's like the period at the end of that part of the story of like, all this crazy shit happened and he's only such and such age and so on. So, and I just kind of just picked up on that now. I didn't really realize that before or make any notes about that, but that's really cool. I like how he chose to do it that way.
I want to take a brief moment to give these early tracks on the album their due in terms of their live performances. This is not an album really replete with live performances of these tracks, but it's really these first handful, kind of on side A of the album, that have gotten a small smattering of live performances over the years. The opening track, Eyes Like the Sky, has gotten 4 plays. Year of Our Lord has been played twice. This one here, The Raid, has been played 5 times. That's the second most, actually. Among Eyes Like the Sky songs. These songs were most recently played, as I think I alluded to in the introduction portion of this episode, took place at the Los Angeles show in June of 2023 at the Hollywood Bowl, when the band members decided to play tribute to Ambrose's father. Of course, Broderick had recently passed away during that time, and so as a nice little tribute to them, they played several songs off of this album. So I think those were just kind of the very easy choices to play off of this album at a setting, especially like the Hollywood Bowl. They're just like fast-paced, energetic, cool, sick guitar riffs, lots of suspense, and I believe they actually played recordings of Broad's voice with the narration during those performances. So want to give those tracks their due. If you were one of those listeners who was at either that show or one of the others where they played these songs live, write in, because I'd really like to hear what your take was on their performances of those. Yeah,
this is certainly a rare album to get to hear any of live, and I don't know, maybe we'll get to hear some of it brought back in the near future. Would be really cool, even if they just threw in like 1 or 2 of them with Broad's narration, or even if it was just like a quick little bit of some of the instrumentation, just a tease, just a little throwback to it would be super cool. But yeah, let us know if you've ever gotten to hear any of this album live. I would love to know. So this song does, of course, have the shortest lyrics, the shortest bit of narration and story of the whole album, and you read the whole quote there, the whole entire narration from Broad. This is where we first read the character's actual name. Miguel O'Brien is his given name, his birth name with his family. But of course, he's going to be known as many different names throughout the story as he falls into the hands of different groups and goes through different periods in his life. He's going to acquire a handful of names. And we can also assume that Miguel was the little boy that they saw walking with the mother outside getting water. Mm-hmm. He was the youngest, and it also seems that they killed the rest of his family. The rest of them were all taken out except for him. He was taken as the lone captive during this raid.
Okay, let's keep the storyline moving here. We're on to track number 4. This is Drum Run.
He learned to leave no tracks, and he learned how to live on what he could keep down. And his name was now Eyes Like the Sky.
This song is much simpler in its composition compared to everything else we've heard so far, due to the fact that its main focus is almost entirely on percussion. That is joined by some hoo-ha chanting in the background as well, so the percussion isn't the only thing, but it gives it this very, tribal ritual ceremony type of feel. Like you can almost picture a whole group of people dancing around a fire or something, playing drums and celebrating or like I said, performing some kind of ritual or something like that. It very much has that feel. There is also a honking harmonica from Ambrose that just blows a single note, and that seems to almost be mimicking some kind of war horn or something, or some sort of ceremonial horn or anything like that. It's just, it does kind of almost have that train whistle kind of sound, but I feel like for the purpose of the rest of the soundscape is probably, I don't know, maybe more meant to mimic a horn or something, but it's just he's just blowing this single note and kind of bending it, and it's really cool. Everything's really simple, but it just creates this really interesting atmosphere.
Yeah, I had the words here in my notes, noisy and discordant, although you're not wrong with your description of this as pretty simple in terms of the musical components and a very straightforward kind of tribal drum beat. We should note that this is chapter 2 of the story, despite this being track number 4. The chapters versus the track numbers do not fully, completely align across the album. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing because you got to flesh out the story a little bit more in terms of the chapters. But I like how in the opening of this song, Broad says, Miguel O'Brien ran with the Apaches. He ran, and as his legs grew, he glided over the desert earth, followed by a little longer of an instrumental break. At that point, I'm picturing kind of this cinematic scene of this passage of time tool by a director, cinematographer, or whatever, showing a very young Miguel running across the desert sand, and the camera pans down to his feet, moving so quickly across the sand, and then the camera pans back up, and then boom, he's grown into a teenager.
Yeah.
Because that's
totally
what happens in this song. 10 years pass, and he's been trained to become this tough, strong, skilled warrior. He's strong. He's presumably adapted more of the traditional garb of the people he's joined here in the Yavapai Apache tribe. And he's become one of them, and he's grown into this strong, capable young man now.
Yeah, the entire track is basically describing him being raised by these Yavapai Apaches that had initially captured him from his family. There's descriptions of him being taught how to hide and to hunt, and also they have given him a new name, which is, of course, Eyes Like the Sky, because of his bright blue eyes that are described.
Can I just say that just yesterday, the day before this recording session, was when it finally occurred to me that the origin of his name, Eyes Like the Sky, came from his blue eyes. I was literally sitting at work listening to this. I was sitting at my desk and I went, oh, I get it.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's brought up multiple times throughout the album. They mention his eyes and how different people give him different names based on them and all this, but oh my God. There's another line in the narration, his blue eyes showed his father's race. And so, that's saying, okay, his blue eyes are a lot more common in people who are Caucasian, and so that's showing that he is, in fact, white. But, wouldn't you think that his like skin tone would also give that away. My thought about this, and this is not explicitly stated, but I believe, and this is partially because of his name, his given name, Miguel O'Brien, is it possible that they say his blue eyes show his father's race because maybe he has a darker complexion, a darker skin tone? Because I'm thinking, because of his name, obviously the last name O'Brien sounds very Irish,
yeah.
Right? That sounds like a very Caucasian Irish name. But his first name, Miguel, is a more popular, Mexican or Spanish name.
Yeah.
So my guess is that I think he's a mixed race of like white American and Mexican. My guess is maybe his dad is white and his mom was Mexican, and so he has this kind of mixed name and like darker skin tone, but then these bright blue eyes that show his white father's side as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's more or less what I was thinking too, because it's never mentioned, after they show, his blue eyes showed his father's race, it's never explicitly stated, oh, his mother was Mexican, or his mother was white, or his mother was a Native American. That's never stated at any point in the album.
Yeah.
So I think it leaves that room for interpretation, but I think in the ensuing tracks here that we're going to discuss soon, that you hit the nail on the head. The blue eyes are like his defining feature that make all these people of various walks of life that go, oh, okay, he's different. He's not, that where the skin tone doesn't necessarily match, what's more common eye color that would go with those skin tones, just as far as like the heritage line would typically go.
Okay, so I'm glad you were also onto the same thing there, and I think that's specifically why, like you said, they never mention anything about his mother, but they just say his blue eyes showed his father's race, so that they make it sound like, okay, they're not, both of his parents were not of the same ethnic background. So yeah, my guess is that his mother was, I guess could have potentially been Native, but I'm leaning more towards Mexican specifically.
Yeah, and that's where I think it gets a little bit convoluted or a little bit tougher to say for sure, because there are, like throughout the southwestern United States, there are various people or tribes who, are like Native Americans who adopt what would traditionally be considered Spanish names. Like I can think of, from my brief time living in Southern California, there's a Native people around that area called the San Manuel tribe. And, we think of San Manuel's, Spanish, and certainly there is a lot of Hispanic population in that area, but that's a native tribe. So there was definitely some, some crossing over of cultures at one point or another. So it's, again, just further solidifying our point that it's really hard to say 100% one way or the other. But the bottom line, father was white, likely of Irish descent, and mother was either, Mexican or Native American, or perhaps a combination thereof. After Broderick says his blue eyes showed his father's race, he then goes on in his narration, he never wore the white painted face of the slave. He was valued for his stamina and distant vision. First off, that white painted face of the slave line, I suppose, is just to say that he was treated kind of as an equal or somebody who was going to be esteemed within the tribe. He was never treated as someone insignificant within the group. On a lighthearted and somewhat irrelevant note here, but it still caught my ear. When Broad reads the line, he was valued for his stamina and distant vision, the words stamina and, you kind of get a hidden ER, valued for his stamina and distant vision. That's one of those Australian English things where when there's a vowel that ends a word and then the next word starts with a vowel also, there's this R that pops up all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And that is the one part of his speech in this narration of the whole record that really caught my ear. Like, okay, that's like the one point where his Australian accent pokes through.
Yep. Yeah, I can hear that just a tiny bit. That's funny. I didn't notice that before. But yeah, there's just a little hint of the Australian under there. So as we kind of stated earlier, there's a few of these tracks that end with a line stating his current age at this point in the story. So the very last couple lines of the track, by the time he was 15, he had already killed Mexican troopers and feared no man. And that is just a cool, cold, hard line right at the end of this to show like how well trained he is and how proficient he is at fighting just at this young age of 15. And that leads us right into the next one, track number 5. This is Evil Man.
An evil man who did terrible things to people in the name of a god that looked upon the man himself with revulsion.
So here as we approach the midway point of the album, Broderick continues in his narration. It is 1864 now, and the Americans' war has not come to the desert lands. So the Civil War is still raging on, but it hasn't come anywhere near out this way in the deserts of the Southwest. That remains out east, and he says the Yavapai Apaches are still lords of all they surveys. So they're really, the land is theirs. They're pretty much in charge of their region of, present-day Arizona or whatever. Until one day, this evil man comes, and he is described and introduced as a man holding a leather book with a cross stamped in the leather. So he's an American settler, he's a missionary, and having grown up in the western United States, these stories are really all across the country from various American cities and towns. Missionaries throughout the decades, the centuries, many came with good intentions in mind. This man was not one of them, clearly, as we will find out very soon here in this story. Many of them came to share the gospel, to spread Christianity. Some kind of pretended they were, but ultimately used that as a guise to take advantage of and marginalize the native people local to the areas that they settled in. So this man, as very strongly implied by the title of the track, Evil Man, this guy has bad intentions in mind here.
Oh, yeah.
And after the brief instrumental break, which I guess we should talk about this epic riff before we go any further. This is one of my favorite riffs on the album. I'm just going to come out and say it.
Yeah.
Followed by the harmonies, which are almost the only vocals we hear on this album aside from Brod's narration. You talked about the kind of chanting on Drum Run when we talked about that song, but other than these kind of harmonizing vocalizations, which according to my research is Ambrose and Stu harmonizing with one another, that is pretty much the extent of singing, really, that we hear on this album. So it stands out that much more as this extra special touch on this song that's really supposed to convey some menace, some malintent, some tension, as the story goes into a really, really pivotal part of the narrative here.
Yeah, it does. And one of the first lines that's just my favorite in this whole thing, the first bit of narration after the music first kicks in and has a little bit of an instrumental break, Brod reads, "An evil man who did terrible things to people in the name of a god that looked upon the man himself with revulsion," is just, wow, it's just awesome. And it's painting the picture right away that, like, this guy, walks around and paints himself like some sort of holy man, spreading the word of the Bible or something, but is actually just using it to his own benefit and does terrible things in the process while, carrying around this Bible like, no, I'm a good guy. I'm doing everything in the name of the Lord or whatever. So I love that line and how he describes him. Again, Brod's writing here is just amazing. And,
yeah, it is.
Of course, he wrote the whole thing. He wrote this whole story himself, and then the band just did the music, and they kind of went back and forth forming it that way. But wow, I love his writing. Like, I don't know if he wrote anything else, like if he was on top. I mean, obviously he wrote a lot of music and was in many different bands, but like if he ever had like a full length novel of some sort I could read that was like either Western or anything else, really, I think it would be an awesome story. He's really showing off his writing chops here.
Absolutely, yeah. The writing chops are there. The skills for kind of building a narrative are there. I want to touch additionally on the latter part of that line you stated, in the name of a god that looked upon the man himself with repulsion. So God himself looks at this guy as, oh jeez, not this frickin' guy. Like he's got it all wrong. Like he's such a terrible representative or whatever.
Yeah.
And like even he wishes he would take a hike. So
yeah, nobody likes this guy.
No, nobody likes him. So as the narrative continues and the riffs continue, Miguel runs from his wiki up, again, his kind of grassy sticks traditional dwelling on the prairie or in the desert, half asleep when they attacked. The rifle butt sent him unconscious. When he came to, he was trussed up on his back on the ground looking up at the Americans. He had not been killed because they had noticed his blue eyes and knew he was one of them, which illustrates, again, just the truly fucked up nature of just the way of thinking of some of these people.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're going to haul him off. Let's knock him out, take him away. Oh, blue eyes. We don't kill him. Like, he's got white blood in him. Like, that's the difference maker. It's, truly horrible, but sadly realistic and true to the times.
Yeah, of course, there was a lot of wars and fighting between the white settlers and the natives at this time, so this is just like a small little snippet of a lot of the terrible shit that was happening in this part of the country, this untamed land or whatever at this time period. Yeah, and so he's knocked out by this rifle butt, and when he regains consciousness, he notices he is surrounded by these Americans who have unfortunately killed everyone else in his camp here, the other tribe members, except for him, like you said, because of the blue eyes. So everyone else was killed, and they end up taking him captive and bringing him along with them. So once again, he was back with his, quote, father's people, as in, the white man, and a family he loved had been killed for the second time.
Yeah, truly terrible, but very illustrative of, just the hard scrabble life, once again, of a young boy on the western frontier. Many of them turned into orphans and went from one family to another, or one group of people from another, and they really had to kind of fend for themselves in many ways. Like they didn't always have a lot of control over it. This, even though at this point in the story, Miguel O'Brien is this strong, capable soldier within the Yavapai Apache people, he evidently gets caught off guard enough for them to, like we said, be knocked out by the butt of a rifle as the people around him are all killed. So all the dark imagery aside here, and of course it's warranted. Like, this is painting a very real picture of things that happened on the western frontier in the 1800s. I want to just state more of my appreciation for the music here on this song. There's not only the harmonizing, there's also a little bit of a development of that main menacing riff. You'll notice the second time through, a couple of the notes change a little bit. Like, whether it's Stu or Joey, I don't know who's actually playing that part, they play around with a couple of the arrangements of some of the notes in that second time through that big riff. And then that's interspersed with Ambrose's wailing harmonica, almost in a call and response type of arrangement. So it's not just reiterating that same riff in its same form. It's developing the song, and it's giving the song some more layers and some more intrigue as they kind of give it these different characteristics and these different attributes the second time through it. So I think because of these reasons, this is easily not only one of the most remarkable and catchy riffs and musical moments on the album, but I think this is one of the most considered and one of the most well put together musically tracks on the album here.
Yeah, totally. I very much agree. It's not just like a simple single riff over and over again. It develops and evolves quite a bit into like a fully flushed out song behind all of the narration and the story. It's a really great one to listen to and enjoy just for the music itself.
So as Miguel is knocked out and dragged away by the Americans, they take him away to one of the major fort establishments around the area, and it happens to be named Fort Whipple. Let's go on to track number 6, the titular Fort Whipple.
What do you make of him? He asked the God-man. He may be the young O'Brien boy who was lost here years ago, or he could be from the Jepson party who never made it to New Mexico, said the God-man back.
Fort Whipple is now, this is chapter 3 of the story. It starts with just a narration without any music. There's just kind of some ambient noise in the background. Broad begins describing this place, this fort that they've brought him back to. Miguel is brought by these Americans to this place called Fort Whipple, along with a few Yavapai girls that they had captured as well. So a man named Willis there is in charge, and when they arrive with these girls and Miguel, this boss or whatever speaks with the God-man. They wonder if this kid is in fact the O'Brien boy that was lost years ago, or if he is potentially from another group that went missing known as the Jepson Party. And they end up calling him Jepson O'Brien, I guess just to cover both bases, because they're not exactly sure where he came from. Mm-hmm. But many people end up just calling him simply Blue because of his eyes, and also because of this sad expression that is constantly on his face, and you can imagine why. And that very expression is described very smartly and with this line that kind of gets you thinking a bit. Quote, "The expression of someone who kills with compassion but not mercy." Oh. I love that line, and it's one of those things that I hear and I have to pause and just think about that for a minute as to like what that means.
I think I literally paused the song the first time I listened through this album, like 2 years ago or whatever it may have been. Like, whoa, that was a really good line. Like, that's certainly a standout lyric or a standout line in the narrative. Because, he was brought up to, have compassion and to learn to cherish people around him, but he was also at the same time raised to be a merciless warrior among the Yavapai Apache people to protect the people around him, protect the land, etc. So there's a real, like, conflict or an inner turmoil there, I think, but evidently carries it with himself well, especially considering all the terrible things he has been through in his life. Mm-hmm. By the way, all by the age of 16 at this point in the story.
Yes.
So this song, and as I scroll through the lyrics here, this song is much more heavily centered, I think, on the storyline, more so than the music. And I will say that this is musically one of the least remarkable songs on the album. It's not nothing. It's not terribly forgettable, but it's also really not a standout track musically. It's really much more replete with setting a scene and establishing a key part of the story as Miguel, Blue, Jebsen, whatever you want to call him, as we said earlier on the show.
How many names does he have now at this point?
Yeah, he basically obtains a myriad of names from all these different people who kind of toss him from one group to another or yank him from one group to another. And another reminder of how these people often sadly like slipped through the cracks or just became anonymous. These Native American people, like, nobody would know who they were because they were just kind of treated as second-class citizens. So these Americans are just like, oh, who is this guy? Oh, we don't know. He might be this guy, he might be that guy, but we don't know for sure. So they, as stated in the storyline here, they do name him Jebsen O'Brien, kind of combining the two components of his kind of history to this point, but blue because of his eyes. But although he was still a boy, it continues to say, the men mostly kept away from him, all except for one, a trapper who understood his skills, and in return fed him and taught him the white man's way. In a short while he could speak and read and also write their language, and he also added the calm, fast dignity of a gunman to his arsenal. So the Americans are now raising him up to be one of his own, kind of coming full circle in his life in a really unfortunate way, because we mentioned he was born to a white American father. He's back in the hands of the white man now. Yeah. They're teaching him how to shoot a gun. They're teaching him to trap animals. Skill sets that are very different from what he grew up with among the Yavapai Apache tribe. For those wondering, Fort Whipple is a real place, and it's located in the city of Prescott, Arizona, kind of in the central part of Arizona. Not so coincidentally, in a county named Yavapai County. So it's really, really cool. Yeah, it's really cool seeing how close to home, I guess, so to speak, that some of these names and locations hit for this band from Australia on just their second album before they've ever been abroad. They're hitting on these very specific names and words and imagery from the American frontier. It's just really cool, the leap they took here to just describe this real life Fort Whipple that existed in real life. We should also note that I think really at this point in the album, this is the opening of side 2 of the record. From here on out, none of these songs have ever been played live by the band, and largely for that reason, and I think also partly because the music in many cases is a little bit less remarkable, leaves a little bit less of an impression in many cases. I think these tracks get forgotten quite a bit, but make no mistake, there's still a lot of really, really juicy and heavy stuff in the narrative to get to yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes total sense. The narrative just kind of gets bigger and bigger from here. The focus is really on the story more than anything, but we are still going to get some good riffs, some cool, interesting music along the way as well. It ends with, after the description of what they teach him as far as reading and writing and speaking their language, which I assume they mean English by that, and, learning how to shoot guns and all this stuff. Broad says he had every skill that you needed to survive at just 17 years old. So he was 16 when he was captured, spent some time with them. He's now 17. So again, we're ending with another age that he's at now. So after this, going into the next track, this is where we're going to take a much darker turn in the story. And we can see what some of these men, these evil men, are truly capable of. Let's take a look at that in the next one. This is track 7. The God-Man's Goat Lust.
Chapter 4. The God-Man with the Bible is in the back room of the chapel at Fort Whipple.
The title of this track doesn't mince any words as to what goes on here in track 7. First, at the beginning of the track, you hear kind of a rustling around in the studio space with instruments, and I guess I say studio space meaning the band's garage space, most likely.
Right.
As we alluded to kind of the backstory of the album. But there's kind of some loose rustling around with the instruments. You hear a little, like, half-assed kind of guitar strum, a little bit of banging around on the drums from Cavs and or Eric. It almost sounds like they're between songs in a recording session. They're trying to figure out, okay, what's next here? But they kept it in here, and to me, I don't know if this was necessarily an intentional choice on their part, but I think that's effective here on track 7 because this is an album full of tracks that really begin in commanding, straightforward fashion in one way or another. Most tracks, like either boom, like a really loud, distorted guitar riff, or Broderick's commanding voice stating the next part of the narrative. But here we kind of go into like this unsettled, like, okay, something's off, something's wrong, and then sure enough, we get this track that absolutely makes your skin crawl. So the evil man, the God man in this story, is holding a gun to the Yavapai Apache girl's head in this back room of the chapel at Fort Whipple while he's assaulting her. And so this is obviously an incredibly uncomfortable part of the story, but again, reflective of the sad truth of how these Native people were often treated by the white American settlers. And so he's obviously using his position of power to satisfy his needs, and he's just taking advantage of her. And then suddenly, the boy, Blue, Jepson, whatever you prefer to call him at this point in the story, he busts in, finds out what's going on, says, "Hey, what the hell?" Kills him instantly, gets his just desserts.
Yeah, he sneaks up on him from behind, as described before the God man can even pull his pants back up after doing what he did. Miguel, eyes like the sky, Blue, all that. He comes up behind him, plunges a knife right into his neck, and sends blood all over the place, kills him instantly. I did want to go back and just touch on some of the sounds at the beginning as this story is starting off. The ambience that's created with the sort of tapping around on the cymbals frantically, the unsettling high-pitched guitar plucks and squeals really do kind of set the stage of like something dark and terrible is about to happen, which of course it does. Again, this whole scene really shows how this man only uses religion when it benefits him and is not a real holy man of any type, but really just a disgusting monster who would do the worst thing imaginable in what's supposed to be a place of worship. Like you said, this was happening in the chapel at the fort, on top of the altar specifically. Yeah. So, just completely paints how this man is just this false worshiper. He just does things for himself. An absolute monster, and he gets exactly what he deserves, and that is where the story takes a bit of a more positive turn and more satisfying when you hear the part of Miguel coming up behind and sticking this knife right into his neck, killing him. And that during that part of the narration is actually where the music settles more into an actual song. We get more of an actual groove coming in there. The drums have this simple, steady beat going. There's some guitar chords as well as the continuation of those high-pitched, spooky guitar plucks. But those are still fitting as well with the dark stuff that's happening here. And after Miguel comes to the rescue and kills this guy, he ends up, he takes the girl with him. They grab some money, food, guns, and 2 horses, and he rides on right out of Fort Whipple with her. to get out of there and go find somewhere else safe for them to be. So there is a satisfying ending to this otherwise very dark track.
Yeah, all things considered, absolutely. Yeah, and just, again, brilliant job by the band using those instrumental arrangement choices to convey the mood shift of this track, going from, as you mentioned, kind of the noisy, unsettled, kind of high-pitched notes on the guitar, the slide guitar, just like playing these discordant notes, conveying that discomfort and the darkness. And there's that kind of high-key piano tinkling, that just like adding this anxious backdrop to it all.
Real, yeah.
Just kind of making the blood boil and making the goosebumps raise on your arm. Speaking from experience here, because anytime I do listen to this track, I get this creepy, crawly feeling, which absolutely was intentional by the band here. But then, as you said, about halfway through, when it goes into that more steady, staid groove, it's almost trying to communicate like, okay, there are kind of these creepy elements remaining, like still some of those weird-sounding guitar slides sprinkled throughout, but it's more of a, okay, we have to move on. Like that's that. The guy's dead now. It's awful what he did, but we need to move on. We've got to get out of here, and we have to take things with us so we can continue to survive.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, I really like the very last line that Broad reads, "The God-man's body was found, but he was not missed." So that just tells you nobody likes this guy. Even the other people around don't really care for him.
Yeah.
They found his body, but nobody is missing him at all, and no one's sad that he's gone, and they don't seem to be like super sad about it or anything like that. So that's good. That's a good, satisfying end to all that.
So Miguel / Jebsen / Blue, as well as his Yavapai Apache.
/ Eyes Like the Sky.
Yeah, / Eyes Like the Sky, as well as his fellow Yavapai Apache's female companion, leave Fort Whipple. They ditch, and we move on to track 8 as our narrative continues. This is The Killing Ground.
They saw it dust way off like dust devils, but they knew it was horses. They could hear shots and no more. When all was quiet a day later, they moved silently towards the killing ground.
So this one starts off with some ambient sounds that I think were the exact sounds Stu described in that long quote that you read at the top of the show here. You hear some dogs barking, some metal clanging, which I think that one like high-pitched sort of pinging noise is maybe what the Stu's dad banging on a saw sound was, so that's that here. And some little like other like metal tapping on things and all sorts of stuff. But eventually we do get some music, we do get some guitar and stuff, and this one stands out because there's actually acoustic guitar on it for the first time on the album. Acoustic guitar accompanied by a whistled melody, which is interesting. So this one is really unique for that reason, but eventually we do also get some of that familiar gritty electric guitar and some drums coming in as well.
First of all, I wonder if that hammer banging on the saw blade that Stu's dad is doing, I wonder if that was like kind of a direction from Stu or the band, like, hey, give us a little ambient noise, or if it was just legitimately oh, hey, I got work to do in the yard and I need to straighten out this bent saw blade, so deal with it. I'm going to be here in the background.
Right.
Either way, though, I like its addition because it adds this, I don't know, I'm picturing almost like this mid-1800s kind of, there's a temporary camp set up and someone's forging a tool or something, like going ding, ding, like trying to, you kind of get what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, that's exactly the kind of the feeling I get of like they're at camp kind of working on things, setting things up and all that sort of stuff.
And then there are also these weird sounds, which are distorted dog barks and howls. It almost sounds like this. It almost sounds like somebody's like playing tricks on a guitar or something, like doing this weird slide with heavy distortion. But those are dogs in the far off background, barking and howling, but really put through some sort of crazy distortion filter of some kind. Really cool ambient backdrop here as we ease into this track number 8. You said also, Joe, that this eventually develops into a more straightforward song or a riff. In addition to the acoustic guitar and some of the other neat elements we get, what stood out to me is that this is kind of a nice minor key waltz that develops. Something that I feel like you don't really hear much of in any genre. It's like this boom, 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 as the acoustic guitar kind of strums along to that rhythm, helping establish that rhythm, and then the electric guitar is kind of playing notes intermittently. It's continuing to build this darkness, but in a much different setting at this stage.
Yeah, it is interesting. That's another thing that makes it kind of unique. The overall rhythm of it is very different. Like you said, it's waltzy. Boom, bam, bam, boom, bam, bam, on the acoustic guitar. Really a cool, unique sort of sound that we haven't heard before yet on this record. So this track here with the story, I feel like is kind of like almost like kind of a calm before the storm, kind of like an in-between track in a way. It sort of sets up a bigger thing that's going to take place on the next track. But essentially here, the two of them are traveling far and wide on horseback and trying to get back into Apache territory to reunite with their tribe, with their people. And at one point in the distance, they hear the sounds of fighting and shooting taking place, and they decide to lay low and not get involved and not get too close. But the next day, they go out to where they heard the sounds coming from to check out the aftermath and see what happened, and they find a group of white people that had been killed, specifically about a half dozen, Broad says. Mm-hmm. But due to the footprints on the ground, they were able to come to the conclusion that this was actually a group of other white men that did this, but disguised as Apache. He describes the moccasin footprints, but that seemed to be in a way that a white man walked, which seems like something like, how could you possibly tell that? But that just, I guess, goes to show you the intuition and the abilities of the people that live on this land, and especially Miguel himself with his skills. He's trained to pay attention to things like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that grabbed my attention as well, and that really does speak to the intuition, like you said, and the resourcefulness of them able to kind of piece these clues together, like, okay, Yavapai Apache wouldn't walk this way, or a Comanche wouldn't walk this way. Like a white man's gait apparently has this like very clear characteristic. I would be curious to know, for somebody who majored in history or something, or for somebody really specialized in this field, let us know. Like, if you have any special knowledge on this matter, because I'm really curious from a kind of sociological standpoint, what kind of characteristics might differentiate between the two, because that's one of those little details that I think really, truly helped save many a Native American person just in this era of such violence and strife and hardship. Man, that's wild. At about 1:43, just over the halfway point of the song, there's a key change in the track, and that's not normally something that stands out in a Giz track, and I feel like they don't do a ton of key changes in the first place. That's not really necessarily high in their bag of tricks, really, to the best of my memory here off the cuff. But that key change at 1:43, it almost kind of gives it this extra intrigue, because this is an album, again, of relatively basic, although often badass and very hard and enjoyable music. That's just one of those touches that I think kind of gets taken for granted in a lot of popular music, but here in this otherwise desolate, quiet landscape of this particular track, it kind of builds this additional intrigue, like, oh, okay, where are we going from here? Like, what are they thinking at this point,
Yeah, it's kind of like inquisitive and uncertain sounding, and just sort of as they're taking in their surroundings and figuring everything out that's going on here. The two of them end up taking some supplies, taking some things that they could use from this site, from this aftermath of what happened here. They take some things and they head out. They continue on their journey. I really like the picture that's being painted here of the environment with the line, "The purple mountains and red ochre earth swallowed them up." So you can almost picture like a shot in a film of sunset or something, and them walking off into the horizon through the hot desert with the sort of the heat line waves coming up off the ground and just disappearing off into the distance as they continue on their journey. I think is a really cool picture.
Yeah. Another minor detail I want to ask you about here. I'm curious, did you know before this song what a dust devil was?
A dust devil? I've definitely heard the term before. I think, is it sort of like not a full-on dust storm, but like one of those little kind of mini cyclones of like wind and dust that pick up and come out across the flat desert.
Yeah, it looks like a mini tornado kind of, and it tends to happen in like bigger open field, dusty areas. Having grown up in the inland northwest here of the States, I realized shortly after I moved out here to the East Coast that a lot of people out here aren't familiar with that whole phenomenon. Like we see dust devils all the time out there when a gust of wind kicks up and swirls over an empty field that's getting ready for planting, for farming, or just a random dusty field where grass isn't planted. Like those wide open dusty spaces don't exist as much out here. So that's just one of those little kind of word pictures that stood out to me here in this song, and just realizing that not really the whole world knows what the hell a dust devil is. So I was really curious to know if you did, and in fact the local minor league baseball team from close to where I grew up is actually named after dust devils. So it's the more you know.
Okay, well, you know what? Speaking of dust, let's move on to the ninth track and the penultimate track. This one here is called Dust in the Wind.
Suddenly the girl dipped sideways, and a split second later the young man heard a distant shot. He dived for some rocks and watched as more bullets hit the girl.
Not to be confused with the famous 1970s ballad by the band Kansas, this Dust in the Wind is a little more frenetic and crazy and upbeat. In fact, just 4 or 5 seconds into this track, there's this feeling of, oh shit, oh no, what's going on, what's happening? It goes from this just quiet ambient landscape to, uh-oh, the pace picks back up and you could feel the fear and panic of this portion of the narrative. And here Broderick says, suddenly the girl pitched sideways and a split. Seconds later, the young man heard the distant shot. He dived for some rocks and watched as more bullets hit the girl. The young man looked to her body, and as she died, he worked out where the shots were coming from. We're only 20 seconds into this track, and the girl has been shot, and she is dead. So it's just... everything is happening at once, like almost too fast to process, and I like that arrangement and sequencing choice here on the track. Like, we're not going to drag this sequence of events out like boom, boom, boom. This needs to happen instantaneously, to where the boy's reactions are almost like behind the 8 ball, uncharacteristically, like he's trying to react, oh, whoa, where, what's that, where's that coming from? So he's ducking for cover as she has been shot dead, and so he's trying to save himself and like look at where the assailants are coming from. Talk about a mood shift and an energy shift here on the back portion of the album.
Oh yeah, and similarly to Drum Run earlier, there's this chaotic focus on percussion and drums, but even more frenetic, even more wild now than before, and faster as well. Less of a steady rhythm and more of just noise, and you're also getting these like discordant piano trills, like just random high-pitched notes being hit all over a piano, helping to aid in this chaos. But yeah, you really just get thrown right in. And right away, this girl is shot from a distance while they're on their journey. She dies, and our protagonist is ducking for cover, trying to figure out where it's coming from. It's absolute chaos. And after some time, he is able to figure out where these shots are coming from, and he knows that he is going to kill all of them. He's able to move behind their position and scope them out, and he sees 3 white men, quote, cladding skins, which I believe is meaning that they are wearing the clothing of an Apache, so that perhaps these were the same men that killed the other group of white people that they found dead in their last location on the last track. He also finds another man further back who's holding all of the horses and some equipment and stuff. So Old Blue decides to take him out first, quickly and quietly, assumedly with a knife, just like he did to the God-Man, is what I'm picturing. Mm-hmm. 2 of the other men are kneeling by the dead girl's body as another stands guard. And Miguel takes the guard out first with a quick shot to the head. There's a great description of a pink spray coming out as he blasts him right in the head with a rifle from far away. The other 2 men drop to the ground. They duck down. Another one of them actually gets shot in the leg, or as he describes, felt his leg blast away. So there's this like graphic, violent imagery of just a big shot taking out this one guy's leg, and they're both down on the ground. The other one's laying down still, just looking around, trying to figure out where it's coming from and where Miguel or Blue or Eyes Like the Sky, where he may be.
Yeah, I'm glad you point out the line, felt his leg blast away. Enter Wilhelm scream here. Ah!
Yeah.
That famous scream that's been used in a multitude of movies over the years. Okay, it's melodramatic in a way, but also, there's plenty of suspense, and it's still an effective part of the telling of this story. And just the frenetic energy throughout, and even a couple of quotes here, like direct quotes from the characters of the story, which we don't get a lot of throughout this album. Do you see the bastard? No, he must be close. And then Broderick comes back, but he wasn't.
Yeah.
He was already gone. He had already darted out of there, gotten the hell out of Dodge, and was already on his way because he made the smart choice. Miguel, Blue, Jepsen, Eyes Like the Sky, he made the right choice again. Like he's able to kind of assess the situation in the moment and just go like, okay, I don't need to waste my time with these guys in front of me. I'm going to go for the guy who's guarding the horses and presumably all the supplies with them. So I'm going to go for him, get what I need, and that's going to be a much more effective way out. So, oh man, like I think that's something that gets lost in many listens. I know previous listens before researching this episode, it didn't stand out to me enough, the resourcefulness of Miguel and some of the other people from the Yavapai Apache tribe in this whole story. Like they're able to, piece together clues, whether it's the moccasin tracks and the white man's gate, like we talked about earlier, or the planning the raid, like very early in the album, or here, just the deciding not to go for the assailants in front of you, instead go for the person guarding the resources. Just genius work and like sheer survival instincts, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Man, it is astounding.
Yeah, absolutely. This is like kind of the big, I don't know if you could really call it a climax, but this is like the big final moment of the album where he really shows off all of his skills, everything he learned, both his like hiding and sneaking abilities that he learned through his time with the Yavapai Apache, but then also his marksman skills with a gun that he learned from the white men that had captured him last. So he kind of puts all of this to the test in this big final moment, and it works out in his favor. Of course, the poor girl got shot and killed, but after she was already gone right away, there wasn't anyone else there for him to defend or anything. So like you said, he did the right thing, took out the two people that were sort of standing guard, and leaves the other two to just be left alone and die in the desert, essentially.
So yeah, this is very much a climactic part of the story. Like you hinted at, Joe, I'm not necessarily sure if you can necessarily call it the climax, but certainly a high point in terms of the sheer action and the panic and the movement and the development of the story. The boy loses his female companion, the Yavapai Apache girl who's with him, but the show must go on, the story must go on, and we're approaching the close here. Let's take it to the closing track, number 10, Guns and Horses.
The young man by now was astride a horse and making for a Yavapai stronghold half a day's ride away.
Guns and Horses is that sounds like the name of like a 80s, 90s rock band. I mean, it sounds kind of familiar.
Welcome to the jungle!
Welcome to the desert!
Oh, jeez.
This final track is the shortest of the whole album, just over a minute long, and it's just like how the first track served as a prologue. This is sort of like the epilogue at the end, sort of summarizing the end for our protagonist and sort of where he ends up after this crazy event and all the shit he's been through. And also bringing it on home, it kind of has a guitar melody very reminiscent of the opening track, doesn't it? It's kind of like a little bit of a different rhythm to it, but it sounds very similar. It's got that but sort of in just kind of plucked a little quicker, a little bit of a different rhythm, but it's nice how that musically sort of brings everything home and full circle.
Yeah, full circle, and it really does kind of feel like a loose reprise of that opening theme, and a genius way to close the album, I think, because we've gotten so many different riff variations to convey all these different moods that have carried us through the story, and pretty accurate, like you said, to call it kind of an epilogue, because it is just over a minute in length, very short, still a little bit of narration packed into this very short track. The young man by now was a straddled horse and making for a Yavapai stronghold half a day's ride away. So he's going back to what he could pretty much reasonably call a home, a Yavapai camp or dwelling somewhere not far away. He had more guns and horses than he needed, and he knew where two white men were sitting in the desert with no water and no horses, white men dressed as Yavapai Apaches. So he's got all the resources he needs to make it across the desert to the next Yavapai dwelling. Meanwhile, these white men are just going to sit and decay in the desert because they have nothing, they've been maimed, and eventually Broad brings it to a close with the lines, "The white men would be calling for their mothers and their god by evening, but the young man would be drunk and thirsty in the full journey, and satisfied by their agony." I like the separation and the gravity of that final line. "And satisfied by their agony." You can picture Broad kind of sitting back from the mic at that point going, okay, my work here is done. Did you like the story or whatever? It's an epic finish to the story, but at the same time, I'm curious if you had a similar experience, even though the narration is effective and presumably brings the album to a nice close. Instrumentally, maybe not the way I pictured it ending. In fact, I think my first listen through, I looked at my phone after hearing quiet for a few seconds. I'm like, wait, what? It's over?
Yeah.
Like, it kind of feels like it's over in a flash, but I think that's just the nature of this very short kind of epilogue track here to close it.
Yeah, definitely. I get that same feeling. It almost feels like there should be a little more, but when you spend some time with it and read through everything, it's all summed up. It's all done. Of course, there could be, I'm sure, plenty more adventures of this guy and more terrible things he has to go through if it were to continue on, but I think just for this short story, it's a good, satisfying ending, and he sort of gets the last laugh in a way, and like I said, everything, all his skills that he learned through his entire upbringing all kind of come to this climax where he gets to use all of them and succeed. So one thing that we failed to touch on at the top of the show, which we normally cover before going into the track by track, is of course the album cover. I don't know how we skipped over that, but we can touch on it now really quick before we wrap things up for the day. I love this album cover. It perfectly encapsulates like the Old West feeling. Everything's kind of got this like there's this pale yellowish background and then a darker yellow in the foreground and some black shading and stuff. Almost kind of reminiscent of like a sepia-toned, old yellowish looking photograph from the time period from like the late 19th century or something. Is so cool. Of course, front and center, we have this big image of a native warrior who we can only assume is our main character, our protagonist, Eyes Like the Sky here, on a horse with an axe in one hand, a rifle in the other, surrounded by some other characters, some other people with guns and cowboy hats and whatnot. Off to the sides, sort of framing that image, we have multiple drawings of eyes with different sky sort of elements in them. There's one with lightning, there's one with rain, one with clouds, and then another one with just sort of some like lines sticking out, I think are meant to represent sunlight, like sunshine maybe. So you have all these different eyes that are like the sky, representing different elements, and then there's big lightning bolts under that. It's just so cool, so perfect for what this album is. Like this image looks like how the album sounds, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I wonder if they either consulted with or worked with in some way a native person with some artistic abilities, because there are some motifs in here that I see as perhaps slight nods to kind of the various design elements of Native American cultures used in things like woven garments or various pieces of artwork that have been preserved throughout the ages. Combination of that, as well as the by then well-established kind of Gizzy aesthetic of the psychedelia, because you have some of the like psychedelic-looking patterns of the kind of these little curly shapes near the bottom or curves near the bottom, and then the eye shapes also, kind of the little patterns inside of those sort of evoke a psychedelic feeling. But yeah, it is a really cool album cover. And then also, we should note there is an alternative version of this album cover. I believe it was during the 2018 reissue by Flightless, the band's then label, of course, of those earlier records. This album cover got a little bit of a makeover. It maintained a lot of the original motif with the whole different shades of beige and cream and yellowish and black and brown. But instead of that whole centerpiece of eyes like the sky and full headdress with the rifle in one hand and the hatchet in the other hand, with the horseback that he is on. Instead, it's all the band members, just their faces in individual circles scattered across the album, with a couple of other changes worth looking at. Both of them look really cool. I would certainly be proud to own either version of this if I were to buy this on vinyl one day. From what I hear, it is kind of hard to find, though. But, I really do feel like I would have to get close to the whole collection one day with my still growing vinyl collection that I have here in my home. But yeah, definitely some very, very cool and appropriately toned and color paletted versions of the album covers here for Eyes Like the Sky.
Yeah, and of course at the bottom of both artworks we get credit given to Broderick Smith, of course. It says story written and narrated by Broderick Smith. And on that reissued one you mentioned, has a little picture of his face on the bottom there as well to accompany all the band members' faces that are on it. Mm-hmm. All right, Spencer, you want to go ahead and give our top 3 and least favorite on this one?
Kind of a deceptively tricky top 3 and least favorite to come up with here, but the 3 I went with for my favorites, in the order they appear on the album: The Raid, Evil Man, and The Killing Ground. I think there are a couple of very iconic riffs, especially with those first 2 tracks I mentioned. Then The Killing Ground is just such a different kind of that waltzy feel to it. So that's kind of how I arrived at my choices. The first 2 were much more easy and straightforward choices, I think, than the latter, but that's where I stand with my top 3. What do you have?
Okay, pretty decent picks. I can see why you'd want to go with those. We only lined up on one, but my 3 I went with are the opener, Eyes Like the Sky, followed by Year of Our Lord and Evil Man. The opener, that riff is iconic. I had to put that in there. Year of Our Lord's got such a cool groove to it that follows nicely at the top of the album. And then Evil Man I just like as well. I like the vibe of it. I like the sort of the vocalizations that are in there. That's kind of cool as well. So that one stood out to me, as well as each of the sort of places in the story that they take. But I think for this top 3, we sort of are mostly focusing just on like the general kind of vibe and sound of them. Yeah. What about your least favorite?
My least favorite is Guns and Horses. It was obviously necessary to bring the narrative to a close, however slightly open-ended it is. But musically, it just doesn't add very much that's super memorable, other than the mere presence of the acoustic guitar, which we alluded to a couple of tracks previous to that. We don't get a lot of the acoustic guitar on this album, so it is a nice touch on that, but just over a minute long, there's just not enough time for really much of a song to develop per se. So that just kind of got thrown down there as my de facto sort of least favorite track. About yours?
Yeah, I actually was originally going to go with a different answer, and I was going to say Drum Run. However, as soon as you started describing Guns and Horses, I'm like, you know what? Actually, I think I have to agree with you. It is so short. There's not really much of a full song that develops, and it's also like not the most satisfying ending. It's a little open-ended. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and agree with you on that one. Guns and Horses being the least favorite, not the strongest of a close after the huge track that came right before it, but it still kind of serves its purpose, I guess.
No real shocker there. I knew Evil Man at the very least was going to be the shoe-in for both of us. I knew the rest was going to be up to chance.
All right, and then one other thing we're going to do a little differently for this album, just because there's such heavy focus. The main thing is the story and the narration that's happening throughout it. So we also just decided to try to pick one favorite track as far as our favorite part of the story, our favorite arc of the story. So do you have one you want to give first, Spencer?
Yeah, for this selection, I went with Dust in the Wind because it just goes from nothing to everything so quickly, and it's just such a peak on the album, and it just brings the energy up to just such a crazy rate after everything was just so serene and calm and ambient. And it just blows my mind every time. And just the shooting and the violence and, okay, gotta hide. Okay, gotta find out who to go after and gotta get all the resources. Just this, I imagine if there was a short film made for this album, that would be the most exciting part of it to watch.
Yeah.
That's how I arrived at my selection. What did you choose for this part?
That's a really good one and a very close contender for me. I almost wanted to have the same thing, but I actually went with a little bit of a different route. I went with Godman's Goat Lust on this, and as dark and disturbing as it is of what's being described and happening here, there is a satisfying ending to it with, Miguel killing this guy and saving the girl, and then they are able to run. That's sort of the climactic moment where they escape and they're off on their own trying to get back into Yavapai Apache territory. And so I think that's like a big moment in the story, a big turning point where they're able to get out of there and escape and all of this. So for those reasons, I think for me, that's like one of the most intense just story arcs and narrative things that happened on the whole album.
Yeah, the latter part of that song is definitely satisfying, all things considered, around the events that happen, and I have to give additional props to the band for just making the hair on the back of our necks stand up. Presumably, I'm sure you have a similar reaction when that song comes on. There's the popular meme of, when that one part of the song comes on and it's a close-up picture of a person getting goosebumps on their forearm.
Yeah.
There are many bands that can achieve that, but not a lot of bands that can achieve it in such a creepy, unsettling way, rather than a more epic way. So, yeah, very, very good choice, and I think that was in the running for me as well for that part of the for that selection.
All right, so that does it for our discussion on Eyes Like the Sky. I hope you've enjoyed hanging and maybe learning a thing or two about it on this discussion with us today. Last of all, before we leave, we're just going to do a quick segment that we do sometimes. This is called Most of What We Like.
Most of what we like.
Most of What We Like is the part of the show where we talk about whatever non-Giz media has captured our attention lately, other music, other podcasts even, books, media, whatever, whatever the case may be. First, for what's catching my attention lately, dude, I've been on a big Radiohead kick the past couple of weeks, and I have long had an appreciation for Kid A for a couple of years now. I remember getting we're just talking about Goosebumps actually just a minute ago here on the show. That opening song, Everything in Its Right Place, just with that menacing keyboard and that minor key, it's the feels for real.
Yeah.
I love that album as well as its kind of sibling album, if you will, Amnesiac, which came out just a few months later, and it was almost like whatever songs didn't end up on Kid A ended up on Amnesiac. It has some pretty unheralded, often criminally overlooked tracks on that one as well. Of course, OK Computer was the one that came right before Kid A, but this was kind of the portion in the band's history where they started to shift their outlook and their focus. They started to go a little more experimental, more electronic, a lot weirder. Mm-hmm. And I've been enjoying this part of their discography quite a bit, and it actually led me to a really cool audiobook I'd like to recommend entitled This Isn't Happening, Radiohead's Kid A and the Beginning of the 21st Century by Stephen Hayden. It's a really cool look into the music industry, what was popular at the time, what was going through Tom York's and the band's heads at the time when, the millennium was coming to a close. They were reveling in the success of OK Computer, although I guess in Tom's case, he was a little bit freaked out by the success of OK Computer and the band's sudden fame. And it goes super in-depth into how all these songs came together, their influences, their time in the studio, just really banging their heads against the wall, trying to come up with something, because Kid A and Amnesiac were really incubating for a long, long time to much media fanfare before it finally came out. And it's just really a fascinating listen to just sort of get a glimpse inside the inside the band's history and the studio at that point, when really exciting things were going on, not only in Radiohead's immediate sort of sphere of influence, but in the music industry as a whole. And then also in a more general sense, I've been listening to a lot of Muse lately. Certainly the two are connected quite a bit. I know Matt Bellamy and his vocal style in particular were very heavily influenced by Tom York's early vocal style on some early Radiohead output. But yeah, I'm going back to the old days when a high school friend, shout out Matt if you're listening to this, burned some CDs of Muse for me. He got me their like first 3 or 4 albums, burned on CDs and sloppily wrote the titles on them for me. Just really got hooked into them. Kind of got away from them unintentionally for several years now, but I've been really enjoying digging into their whole extensive back catalog now over the past week or two. So that's what I'm digging lately. Joe, how about you?
All right, very cool stuff. I have 2 little things, one of which is an album that was recommended to me by a friend just last weekend called Magic Alive by rapper McKinley Dixon. I had never heard of this guy before. I think he's a little bit newer. I don't know how many albums he has. I really don't know anything about him. But a friend of mine sent me this album and just said, hey, check this out. I think you're going to like it. It's reminiscent of the music and production is kind of reminiscent of To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar, which is a big album and very renowned for its jazz production and everything. So this kind of has a similar thing that it's hitting on a little bit. I've only listened to it all the way through once so far, and I want to spend some more time with it. But from what I heard, as of right now, I'm really loving it. His flow is great. I still have to figure out sort of the full story and everything, but I could tell it's very personal. And yeah, this guy just has a great sound to not only his voice, but the music as well. So again, that's called Magic Alive by McKinley Dixon. If you're looking for some new rap to check out, I think it is pretty sweet stuff. And on top of that, I have also been very much enjoying the most recent season of The Last of Us television show. Surprisingly, I have never played the games at all. I heard a lot about them for years and years, and decided that when the show came out and it was getting rave reviews that I would just check it out and take in the story of it that way. So I really loved the first season. The second one just came out recently. It's been coming out one episode at a time, but I think the entire thing is out by now. I was kind of late getting started on it, but yeah, so The Last of Us television show, great. Whether you've played the games or not, it's a really great story, and it's got a lot of drama, a lot of dark things happening, a lot of action with the infected and whatnot going on. It's really great. I've been enjoying it a lot. So if you're looking for a new show to watch, I recommend checking that out as well. So that's it for me this week.
All right. Yeah, good stuff, Joe. Thank you for sharing those. Very quickly, as to what we're going to discuss next time on the show, we're going to break away from the album discussion format and do something a little bit different. Still need to hammer down some details here this time, but we will include some reading of your messages. If you have anything to send us in the meantime, please do. PodagonInfinity@gmail.com, or reach out to us on any of our socials, Facebook, X, Instagram, or Blue Sky. We would love to hear from you. And we're also probably going to spend some time talking about the upcoming shows that we're going to. We're going to be going to the orchestral show in Philadelphia and the Forest Hills Night 2 rock show. So we're excited for both of those. In fact, I believe Forest Hills is officially less than a month away, dude. Can you believe it?
Oh, boy.
So excited.
Ooh, boy.
So that's what we'll be talking about next. And, dude, Joe, how about Eyes Like the Sky? This was one that I think we had bandied about a little bit for kind of getting up there in the album discussion mix, and we finally nailed it, and that was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely was a lot of fun, and I am looking forward to whatever, all the kind of grab bag of variety stuff we're going to be touching on next time is going to be fun as well. Obviously, we're very excited for the shows coming up, so that's going to be a big focus of the discussion. But until then, my name is Joe.
And my name is Spencer.
Later, Gators. Woo!
A quick reminder, if you're not already words.